Harris flip-flops on building the border wall. Lead paragraph: if she's elected president, Kamala Harris pledges to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the wall along the southern border, a project she once opposed and called un-American during the Trump administration. Well, there's shameless, there's really, really shameless, and then there's the Kamala Harris for president campaign. I mean, we've seen her pivot and flip-flop and change direction, although technically we haven't seen her do any of those things. All of these changes to her long-held policies up until now have only been communicated by anonymous staff members leaking something to a favored publication, and then suddenly, oh, she's changed her position. No, until she says something about it, she hasn't changed a damn thing. And this morning, we all woke up with another one of these remarkable revelations from the Harris campaign. First, let me remind you, in no uncertain terms, where Kamala Harris stood on the border wall. Remember this?
Let me be very clear. I'm not going to vote for a wall under any circumstances, and I do support border security. And if we want to talk about that, let's do that.
All right. Not supporting a border wall under any circumstances. And she's serious because she said, let me be clear. But in case it wasn't clear, here she was again.
We cannot continue to have an administration and a president of the United States who puts his vanity projects ahead of the needs of the people of our country. And let me just be more clear about that. I've been to the border. I prosecuted transnational criminal organizations. The idea that he is trying to say that we have people that are trying to invade our country to commit mass crime is a crisis of his own making. You talk with the people who take an oath to protect our border, and they will tell you the trafficking that is happening of drugs and guns coming into our country, it's happening at ports of entry. We don't need a multi-billion-dollar wall. That wall ain't gonna stop them.
So it's a vanity project for President Trump. And let me just quote her properly. That wall ain't gonna stop them. Huh. Well, that was Kamala Harris then. Here's what we woke up to this morning. Axios, again, a favored publication who will just reprint anything the Harris campaign wants, led with this: Harris flip-flops on building the border wall. Lead paragraph: if she's elected president, Kamala Harris pledges to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the wall along the southern border, a project she once opposed and called un-American during the Trump administration. I got to tell you, I don't think I can continue this conversation by myself. It's way too... Well, frankly, I'm overwhelmed by the hypocrisy and cynicism. Let's get an expert in here to break it down even better. He is the president of the Mighty Heritage Foundation and a true warrior for conservative principles, Dr. Kevin Roberts. Dr. Roberts, thank you for joining us today. I'm left speechless in amazement at how shameless and embarrassing this is for Kamala Harris and the media.
It is. It reminds me of that moment in 2004 when John Kerry said, as he was running for president, that he voted for that bill before he voted against it.
Yeah.
It's almost as if, Larry, I know this will be a shock to you and your audience, progressive Democrats believe that they can say one thing and then say another thing, and the left won't hold them accountable. But the good news is the American people are. They realize that the border wall is a necessity as it relates not just to border security, but to the American dream. Vice President Harris and her boss, President Biden, have been not only complicit, but they have been leading, I think, one of the greatest violations of the rule of law in our history. And the reason she's flip-flopping, to sum up here, is because their policies are that unpopular. And the reason they're that unpopular is because they're so damaging and harmful to the American people.
You've recently written about this. I believe it was in the New York Post, where you talked about Kamala Harris's history with regard to the Biden administration on the border. I'd love to break down some of what we just saw from her, because the moment where she said the idea that international terrorists are crossing our border is laughable, I think she said. We know for a fact that that's precisely what's happened in the last 3.5 years, don't we?
Yes, ask the parents of any of the victims of the violent crimes, the murders and rapes that so many of these illegal aliens have committed in Texas and Georgia in particular, but also in places far from the southern border like New York. And those cases, Larry, to the key point of your question, are the precise reason that the vice president is running away from her record and, in fact, doing a complete 180 on it. She realizes that after her performance on the economy in the last 3.5 years, her performance on policies surrounding immigration in the southern border and the crimes that illegal aliens commit are deeply, deeply unpopular. There's no way she can run this race while trying to defend those policies. So she's tried to very artfully flip-flop, and whether it's Axios or the New York Times or some other official outlet of the Biden-Harris regime, they are complicit in purporting these lies, reporting these lies to the American people.
Yeah, in fact, I almost feel like we shouldn't be presenting this as a flip-flop, as you heard me say, unless she says it and says it in a forum where she can be challenged, because, I'm no Axios or New York Times journalist, Dr. Roberts, but if I were sitting across from her and she said, yeah, we're going to spend hundreds of millions on the wall, I would immediately say, okay, so now wait a minute, you're on the record with a very different position. So were you wrong then? Or have you learned something? What has changed? Was Trump right back then? Please explain. But she's avoiding all of that.
That would require her to sit down for an interview, or it would require a member of the mainstream media to actually ask her a hard question. After the absurdity of Kamala Harris doing this flip-flopping on this issue and others, the next greatest absurdity of this election cycle, and I never thought I would say this after living through, the 1990s and early 2000s of Dan Rather, the mainstream left-wing media has never been this ridiculous. They've never been this absurd as it relates to not reporting the facts. They are totally in the tank for the Biden-Harris regime, the Harris-Walz campaign, and that's why it's so imperative to have conversations like this. And I applaud you for them, because the American people, regardless of what their politics are, the left, the right, the center, they just want to know the truth. And the truth is, Vice President Harris is lying once again.
One of the things I really admire about you, Dr. Roberts, and what you've been able to do at Heritage in such a short time there in your tenure is you sort of breathe new life into how you address these issues, but then you're solutions oriented. You're like, let's not just sit here and complain about and point out what's wrong. Let's come up with solutions. So I think the American people are really hoping, if this election goes the right way, that the disaster that you detail in your column and the border security dilemma, the tragedies, the human tragedies that we've seen, this can be reversed quickly. How confident are you? Because I know you're surrounded by a lot of people who have done this for a living. They're professionals, and now they work at Heritage to sort of promote ideas and solutions. Can this be fixed quickly?
It can, and I want to inject not just hopefulness, but substantive hopefulness. And all of my colleagues at Heritage know, I abhor this hollow optimism that we sometimes hear from politicians, and it's one of the reasons I always love talking to you. And so there are 3 or 4 things that have to be part of real policy solutions. The first is the idea for the policies, right? The second is a political leader or political leaders who have the spine to actually stand up for those policies. The third is some subordinates to those political leaders who actually can implement them because of their expertise. And then the fourth, and in a lot of ways the most important, is the popular will. All of those ingredients not only exist as it relates to immigration, border security, and the rule of law, but they exist in spades. You think about Mr. Trump's record in his first term. You think about Senator Vance's record, his wonderful messaging on these issues. I am really confident that if conservatives prevail on this election, not just for the presidency, but up and down the ballot, that the American people can see a very quick return to normal, which Mr. Trump was able to implement by the end of his first term. The last thing that I will say is that I have to applaud a lot of governors, whether they're Governor DeSantis of Florida, Governor Abbott of Texas, who understand that in addition to federal action, there can also be state action on these measures. And it reminds me that the future of this country, the future of the conservative movement, lies not in Washington, D.C., the infamous imperial city, and not just even in state capitals or governor's mansions, but in the hands of the American people who tomorrow want to wake up in a normal country. Closing the border and restoring the rule of law is the best way we can restore the normalcy of the United States.
While we've got you, Dr. Roberts, let's detail some of this brand new and improved, reinvented Kamala Harris. We know she doesn't want to we're told that she doesn't want to defund the police anymore. We're told that she doesn't want to criminalize private health care now. We're told that she doesn't like the Iran nuclear deal now. And suddenly we're told that she wants a border wall. I feel like we're just a day's news cycle away from her putting on a red hat and screaming, drill, baby, drill. Do you have a good understanding of where she stands on energy policy? Because when President Trump gives his patented speech at these rallies and he says we're going to be energy independent, that's one of the biggest applause lines. And we know that the Biden-Harris policies with regard to energy is one of the driving factors with inflation right now because it drives up the cost of everything. Where does Kamala Harris stand on fracking in Pennsylvania? Kind of an important issue in that state.
Well, she's opposed to it, but we don't know that from her own lips, at least in the recent past. We know that from previous presidential cycles. Look, they're running, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are running away from the typical leftist position on fracking, on energy production generally, which obviously is the best way to lower inflation, because it's deeply unpopular. And so just like her flip-flop on immigration, her flip-flop on a host of other issues, including national security, she's actually trying to make herself sound more like President Trump. Why? Because Trump's policy performance as president, his policy prescriptions, should he win a second term, are not only right in terms of what can cause inflation to go down and prosperity to be realized in places like Pennsylvania, they're also very popular politically. And I think she realizes that merely running away from the Biden-Harris record in the last 3.5 years on energy policy, where fracking has been closed, permitting has become very difficult in the oil and gas sector, these are all things that voters in places like Pennsylvania simply disdain. She's making a political calculus here. It's incumbent upon the American media, even if they might be left of center, to tell the truth. And the truth is, she's lying once again.
Well, listen, we're living in a day and age where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just joined Donald Trump on a stage at a rally and said, "Make America great again." So I guess if Kamala Harris wants to embrace the wall, good on her. But we really can't trust her on these things. We can't trust her on any of these policies, really, can we?
We can't. It would be nice if we could on sort of a human level, but she is remarkably inconsistent and incoherent as it relates to anything involving American policy that can restore the American dream.
Dr. Kevin Roberts, getting things done over there at Heritage Foundation. We really appreciate you. And thank you. That was, frankly, a very sane, rational, intelligent conversation, which is kind of an outlier for this program. So I appreciate you bringing it.
Well, you deserve all the credit. Thanks for everything you do.